Welcome to the Exaras Exchange, where we question, dissect, and challenge the state of humankind. Today we're going to be talking about Armenia, a country landlocked in the Caucasus with an impressive ancient history and a complex current political state. 2 years ago, thousands of Armenians marched from the city of Gyumri to the capital Yerevan following the revolutionary leader and once imprisoned journalist Nikol Pashinyan in protest against the former government. Today we are going to be evaluating the success and impact of the Armenian Velvet Revolution 2 years after it occurred. With us we have Teresa Di Mauro. Teresa is a journalist covering Eurasia. She is a contributor to the Italian geopolitical paper Atlas of Wars and Conflicts covering the Caucasus region, and most recently she has been writing for CivilNet in Armenia and for Open Caucasus in Georgia. Not only was Teresa in Armenia during and after the revolution, but she has compiled the latest testimonials from Armenian journalists, activists, and politicians that she has personally interviewed for her upcoming article, which I will be linking below in the future. Teresa, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So let's start off with the basics. Tell me briefly about what happened in Armenia 2 years ago. What is the Velvet Revolution?
Well, so as you mentioned before, the Armenian Velvet Revolution is a series of protests that took place mostly in Yerevan between April and May 2018. The leader was Nikol Pashinyan, who is the current Armenian Prime Minister. And together with him, the main activists and the main protagonists of the revolution were even civic groups, other political parties that were even members of Pashinyan opposition coalition. Basically, what happened was that people were tired of the Republican Party, and especially its main leader, Serzh Sargsyan, because he was going to be in power for his third term. So Serzh Sargsyan was into power from 2008 until 2018 as a prime minister. And what happened was that in 2015, with a constitutional reform, Armenia passed from a semi-presidential system to a parliamentary system. And for the opposition was the attempt, was Sargsyan's attempt to keep the power. So what happened is that at the end of his term, actually he wanted to be elected as a prime minister. So people saw this as a possible, Sargsyan as a possible, totalitarian figure. And so they decided to take the streets, and this is how the Velvet Revolution began.
So basically people were fed up with Serzh Sargsyan's attempts to take power and keep the power, which was an undemocratic move.
That was Serzh Sargsyan was the main target of the revolution. Then, of course, together with it, there were his political party, the Republican Party, who was, of course, into power since the really beginning of the new Armenia, the Armenia after the collapse of Soviet Union. And they were tired, fed up with corruption. There were many other reasons. But let's say that Sargsyan was the main target of the first part of the revolution.
Okay, and so people basically took the streets and rebelled against this new movement, and you were there while this happened. So tell me a little bit about how this played out in the society and the energy you felt during and after the revolution.
Yeah, so I was there, as you said, as an exchange student. I was studying in Yerevan State University at that time, and I think I was really lucky to be there from the beginning till the end of the revolution, because I arrived in Armenia in January and I left the country in July. So the revolution happened in between in April and May, and I was there while it happened. So I had a lot of friends, a lot of students that were with me in the university, my teachers, a lot of people that I knew were taking part in the revolution. And especially some of my closest friends at that time were the leaders, like the organizers in the civic group, together with the party of Pashinyan. So yeah, I had the chance to follow the revolution from the inside. And I would say that at the beginning, so just a few people participated. Like when Pashinyan arrived in Yerevan after the march that you mentioned, just probably like 5,000 people participated. People were really scared, because on March 1st, 2008, when they tried to do the same and they were protesting against Sargsyan election, first election, like police was really violent, and some people were killed. So up to 10 people, but probably even more. And people were thinking that the reaction would be the same. So they didn't really trust the movement. They didn't really think that they could change something. And they weren't sure that that the movement would be non-violent, as Pashinyan was saying at the beginning. I mean, during even the whole time of the revolution. Then what happened was that, so there were some major events, but so people started to see that actually it was true. The protest was non-violent, was peaceful. Police was not intervening, or at least there was just one. Probably the worst day was when after 10 days, no, even less, after a few days that the revolution started, they tried to reach the parliament. And of course, it was a day or the day before Sargsyan election. And there was the barbed wire and a big line of police and some water cannons that were defending the parliament. So protesters reached this point. And of course, when they tried to go a little bit further, they used like some tear gas, police used some tear gas and some grenades. So of course, everybody was scared, and some people got injured. Even I think Pashinyan himself got injured. I was there in that time, like really close to the first line of the protesters, because I was with a friend and I wanted to know from closer what was happening. And I can say that it was really scary, because we were really not expecting this reaction, even if it was in that time that I thought, okay, the movement doesn't want to be violent, but if protesters go just a little bit forward, a reaction is expected, let's say. It's like it was so clear that police would intervene if they would step forward. So after this, what happened is that so they thought, like the organizers together with Pashinyan, thought that they had to change the style of the protest. So instead of going all together to one point, for example, like the parliament, they decided to delocalize and start some act of civic disobedience.
Are you saying that they weren't together anymore? They were more dispersed around the country?
Exactly. Yeah, so they were starting from from early morning, let's say like 8:30, something like this. And especially students were there at that time. And everybody could use like creativity, say stop the city, to create some troubles for the city. And so basically what they did was that they were, for example, putting some benches in the middle of the street. There were even like people with women with their little children, like blocking the streets, or there were musicians playing on the zebra crossing. They felt like they had to be creative, and everybody had the responsibility to do something in, let's say, to change something or to block one part of the city. And what happened is that, the main consequence was that the police didn't know how to stop them. So they didn't know, it wasn't something predictable as, for example, just a big group going somewhere. They couldn't stop like all of the protesters together, but maybe they stopped one, but there were thousands more like around the city doing something. So after that, like people even enjoyed like being in the protest.
Brilliant tactic on Pashinyan's side, yeah.
Yeah, I would say so. And yeah, and then the other major event that changed even, I think, the future of the revolution was when Sargsyan resigned. So
Tell me a little bit
after,
more about that, sort of how it ended, and then we can get into the other part
yeah,
of the interview. We're going to talk
sure.
about the impact.
Yeah, in that, so actually, it was one of the main aims, as I told you before. But so actually, he got elected that day when protesters tried to stop his election. They didn't succeed, and he was elected. They kept protesting for a few days more, and on the 23rd, so of April, the protest started on the 30th of April, and after 10 days, actually he resigned. So not even after 1 week he was elected prime minister, he resigned.
So Serzh Sargsyan resigned voluntarily without any violence after these peaceful protests. Very rare.
It was, yeah, unexpected, and there have been many ideas why it happened. How is it possible that he resigned? Because it was one of the, yeah, really most unexpected thing, because he was into power for so long, and they tried so many times to protest against him that nobody was really believing that he could resign, and especially so quickly. But it happened. So
can you share with me any of those perspectives, if you remember, as to why people thought that he may have resigned then?
Basically, it's really unclear why he resigned. For Armenians, it's because he saw actually how many people participated, and like, let's say that from 5,000 people, the protests, at the end there were like 200,000, something like this. So of course it was a huge movement, especially for Armenia, that is a really small country with not even 3 million people. Having so many like protesting every day was a huge thing.
With no opposition.
With no opposition, yeah. This could, I think, could create some maybe fear, and he understood, for the Armenian side, he understood that he had no any more time into power. He had no support. He had no, like, he had to do it because they wouldn't stop. So yeah, I guess these, at least this is what I remember.
Thank you for that. I want to dive a little bit deeper into the people's grievances. So they protested the change in the constitution, which would give Sargsyan more power in the long run. But what were some of the grievances and complaints that people had in general? Can you give me some examples of corruption in Armenian society before the revolution?
Armenians were fed up, yeah, as I said, with corruption mostly, but also with poverty. Like, I think if I remember correctly, like poverty was at 23% in 2000. So many 20%. Armenians were like, they had low salaries. Yeah. They had low salaries, and a lot of people were migrating outside Armenia for this reason, because they couldn't find like a proper job with a proper salary in Armenia. So a lot were going to Russia, for example, to the US, even to Europe. And Armenians were really scared that if a really big amount of people will leave the country, nobody will stay. And as they have this really critic like relations with Turkey and with Azerbaijan from the other side, and the ongoing conflict actually with Azerbaijan, they fear that nobody would be there to protect the country, and nobody would be there to contribute even to the country's growth. So yeah, these were some of the main reasons. But yeah, corruption was the biggest,
issue.
the most important issue. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, for example, as you mentioned, there were some, for example, after Pashinyan was elected, of course, his first aim was the fight against corruption, as he said, like during the whole revolution. And in the first months after of his government, so for some of Sargsyan's relatives were arrested. For example, his brother, Sargsyan's brother, was arrested for stealing like 30 million state funds. Also, his nephew was arrested after like a few months in Prague for for similar reasons. Now, I think in his case, actually was for because he had a lot of drugs and weapons, and he had like some probably traffics with those things. And also I think there was another case. There is the case of Robert Kocharyan, who is the second president of Armenia. Actually, he wasn't found guilty of corruption, let's say of stealing state funds, for example, but he has been charged of as one of the most responsible figures of what happened in 2008 during the
prison now.
Yeah, I think so. Or
but
I'm not sure.
Is not. So that's interesting.
Sorry?
But Sargsyan is not. Kocharyan is. But
yeah, and there are some. Yeah, it's not clear what. I mean, he was the main target of the revolution, so people were expecting that it will be even the main target of the fight against corruption. But actually, even in this case, there are some ideas why it didn't happen. Actually, so it didn't happen for a bit, I should say, because now in December of last year, he has been accused of stealing also, I think, 1 million of state funds. They were supposed to go to farmers to, let's say, to have more
like government subsidies to support the farming.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. So he's accused now of something, let's say, but it took time to find something for let's say to start a process, like a trial for him. And yeah, some of the reasons are that probably for experts and analysts are that Sargsyan was probably clever enough not to be directly involved in some corruption actions. He was clever to be to keep silence after the revolution, not criticize Pashinyan openly or too much. He was probably even clever enough, not to ask like Russia to interfere during the revolution. So for many reasons, like he resigned. So that's also. And the other thing is that he also gave an amnesty to Pashinyan when he was in prison. So there are many reasons why probably didn't really start with, but he's coming. Like some troubles are coming for him as well.
You mentioned Russia, and you mentioned Turkey and Azerbaijan as well. And just for our audience members who don't know, Armenia has closed borders with Turkey and Azerbaijan. There is a disputed territory between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and Armenia is in the Russian sphere of economic influence, necessarily so. And now let's talk a little bit about what Pashinyan has done, sort of what the priorities of the government are when it comes to foreign policy, domestic issues, and then also what he's doing with Nagorno Karabakh. So let's begin with whichever issue you think he's trying to tackle the hardest, and I guess the conflicts that he's faced in trying to do so.
Yeah, so starting, for example, from foreign policy of this government, actually it wasn't like one of the main goals of the revolution. It was mostly like actually was a domestic matter. So like some changes in the foreign policy, of course, is like an indirect consequence of the new government, but yeah, it wasn't the main goal. Anyway, so Armenia, as you said, has a really complicated like inner situation, complicated borders, and Russia, for example, is its main energetic partner. Russia is defending and has some military bases close to Turkey in Gyumri. Russia is really important. It's a really important country for Armenia, but at the same time, I mean, Armenia, as they told me, is a really small state and cannot really behave as big states, let's say. So Armenia needs to keep a balance with the different forces that they are playing in its territory. So, for example, with the EU, there is also a kind of good relationship. So, for example, in 2017, they signed this partnership whose main goal is to arrive to visa liberation for Armenians. It's something that it's like a discussion is ongoing. Of course, the coronavirus situation slowed down the process a bit. But for Europeans, for example, I mean, as Europeans, we can go to Armenia without visa and we can stay there for up to 6 months, while Armenians still need a visa to come to Europe. So, but some changes, for example, have been done because before the crisis, coronavirus crisis, Ryanair started some flights in the Caucasus. This was one of the even biggest achievement, let's say in the past few months, because Europeans and even people from all over the world could go to Armenia more easily. So tourism would be improved and so on. But apart from this, so yeah, basically, Armenia needs to keep a balance and keep like good relations with all the different forces in the territory. And you said about Nagorno Karabakh also. You mentioned the conflict, yeah?
You could say that's both foreign policy and a domestic issue at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. In that sense, for example, I was expecting some more changes with this new government, because one of the main differences with the previous ones is that Pashinyan is not directly involved wasn't directly involved in the war. So there is even different relations with like amongst Pashinyan and Aliyev, which is the president of Azerbaijan. But it's still a sensitive topic. So there are still like the young generation. There are still a lot of people that have participated in the war, even in the most recent one, the 4 days war in 2016. So people still, even from in Armenian from side, they still feel the war and its consequences. And plus, the position of the leaders are mostly the same as they were before. Maybe one of the main differences is that Pashinyan said openly that Armenia cannot represent Nagorno Karabakh in the negotiation process, but so he wants Nagorno Karabakh representatives to be in the negotiation. He spoke more openly to Azeri people. He addressed his speeches to Azeri people. But yeah, still mostly the basic stuff about what Armenia is claiming is the right of self-determination of Nagorno Karabakh, while Azerbaijan supports the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan on Nagorno Karabakh. So these are still two different positions to come to
two sides with a similar interpretation, but on the opposite side. And until this territorial dispute is solved, unfortunately, I don't think people will feel any different on either side. But But moving on from that, and talking about sort of the domestic changes when it comes to, you talked about how Pashinyan has been tackling corruption. How about media transparency, rule of law? What are the other things that he's doing in the society today?
Yeah, so concerning media freedom, basically, so not really much has changed. I mean, Armenia was considered like partially free before the revolution. Yeah, of course, it got free after the revolution. Like it's considered from Freedom House, like a free country. But so there are like some issues related to anti-government speeches, anti-government propaganda, hate speeches from the opposition. There are still, the Republican Party still owns some of the main TV channels. But on the other side, after the revolution, some media became, let's say, pro-government. So there is this issue, like there are still some independent media that are doing like really great job. And then there are these two different sides, like one anti-government with hate speeches and so on, and some even maybe too pro-government. And yeah, so this is related to the press, let's say, the media situation. Concerning, for example, the justice sphere, this is one of the main concern of the people I've been talking to in these weeks, because they think that not really many changes have been done in this sphere. There is a really like big need of judicial reforms. There are still, even at the top level of the justice system, there are still judges that belong to the previous regime. They are still corrupted. So there is a really urgent need of some changes, as well as like some, and the same situation is for the national security sphere. There is still need of a lot of reforms on that side. The main, like the more visible results are in the corruption sphere, as we said until before. But there is still a lot to be done in these two spheres. And I will add that as students were the main protagonists of the revolution, they're also now the most disappointed ones from the new government, because together with hoping to have a more democratic country, they were also hoping to have more reforms even in the educational sphere that actually didn't arrive. I mean,
haven't come into fruition yet.
Yeah.
Do you think that Nikol Pashinyan has any other priorities ahead of education, or is there anything blocking him from investing more in education?
So for example, one of the student leader, who was really one of the leaders or also of the revolution, told me that they have been meeting with even different ministers that have been discussing about what are their requests, what are their complaints, but nothing has been done yet. So probably it's because there are some other priorities, but I guess it's really important that they will also listen more to students, because they're going to be the future leaders and the more disappointed from this change.
Well, it sounds like a positive thing that at least they have the ability to speak directly to some representatives of the government now. So what we've seen, well, and of course, Pashinyan has been in power for 2 years and reforms take a long time. So we have a little bit more opposition in the media. We have the tackling of corruption, and we also have some more direct access two representatives of the government. And this is a rare revolution because it was successful and it was peaceful, and also because the country has stayed intact 2 years after. And normally in a lot of countries that experience political disruption, you don't see that happening. Are there any opposition groups now that have risen in response to Pashinyan's governance?
Some, but actually they're still too weak to be considered a real opposition. There are like really small parties that didn't even arrive to 10% of consensus in the last election. Pashinyan's coalition got like 70%. Just to understand like what's the difference between the government now and the opposition parties. The Republican Party is out of the parliament right now. So yeah, one of the main issue is also that there is still not a strong opposition. There are some, as I said, but yeah, still not strong enough.
Teresa, this has been very informative. We're slowly running out of time, and I want to ask you a couple more questions before we conclude. Well, first of all, in your perspective, what do you think needs to be done to sustain this more democratic type of governance in Armenia?
Yeah, so basically, I think that judicial reforms should be one of the priorities of this government. For a democratic country, there is a really big need of a free and strong judiciary system. So I think that's one of the main points. And as I said before, I think it's really important that they will, as soon as possible, like the government will fulfill like students' requests, or at least they will show like some more consideration to students, because really I felt that they're really disappointed, and they would be the future protesters or the future leaders. So they really need some more consideration. Yeah.
That's actually a great point that you just brought up. That you need to invest in the students, or else they will protest against you, because they're the ones more likely to protest. So this has been very informative. I just want to ask you finally, if there is anything else that you want to mention, that you want to add to this topic before we conclude, perhaps in your own words, a few sentences of your evaluation of Pashinyan's governance and of the situation in Armenia in general.
Yeah, sure. I think just really shortly to sum up, I think it was really a great movement and a great thing what happened in Armenia. And as Armenians couldn't expect like that their success. I couldn't expect it either as an observer. I think that also, even with its limits, but it's the better scenario that Armenia has right now, to have Pashinyan into power. Probably expectations were really high, even too high. So it's normal that some people are disappointed a bit. But I think in general it's a great success. So let's see if in the upcoming months and years what happens in the country. I'm really curious.
It has yet to be seen. Teresa, thank you so much for compiling all these important perspectives and for sharing your insight.
Thank you too, really, for inviting me.
And yeah, I just want to add that if you are an Armenian national or regional expert, please share your perspective on Armenia's current political and social state. Because Teresa and I have both been blessed to be able to experience Armenia and its people's perseverance, unity, and commitment to change and improvement. Now we're going to leave you with an audio excerpt from the performance Feeling the Revolution. Feeling the Revolution is an audio walking tour taking you through some of the major sights and feelings related to the Armenian Revolution, and is created by Tzolek Milk Galistyan, founder of Armenia's first contemporary dance company, Mihr Theatre. Go ahead and check out their website in the description box and stay another 2 minutes to hear about the revolution from the people's perspective. Thank you again, Teresa. And thank you all for joining us at the Exaras Exchange. Have fun, and in these crazy times, keep on questioning.
If I'm standing, next to me are my sisters and brothers who looked fearlessly into the eyes of those who had Soviet monarchy education, seized power, violated human rights, and said, "You didn't exist anymore." I remember the words of a lady looking down from this window and shouting, "Oh, my dear, be careful not to get beaten. You can't manage anything. Go home." We are at home, and we will not go anywhere, and our home is free from corruption. I'm 17, and I'm not scared, and I would advise you not to worry about us. This is definitely one of my favorite conversations that had taken place on the Northern Avenue in front of my eyes. We were tired of a stagnant, unchanging country, of the same corrupted, impudent politicians. Every time you look at them, you see that it seems to them that they are unpunishable and have eternal power. And we were standing on the streets, on the sidewalks. Our cars were blocking roads. The children were with us too, because we were standing with open arms. We were peaceful, but very strong. Every step that the society took was conscious. As one person, we were all looking at a future which we could choose and build. We were peaceful. The palms of our hands were high. We didn't do anything illegal, merely acts of civil disobedience. We were shouting that the policemen were ours, and our palms were always up as a sign of peace. It was very important to us that we were peaceful. The real power is peace. Peace is the kind of force that is invincible. It became the power and the weapon that brought us victory. A peaceful, non-violent revolution was our revolution that took place in the spring of 2018.